on the 18th of March, 1918, probably in order to keep my father out of the World War I draft. I was christened John Frederick Zengel. And those times I do not remember very well. The earliest recollection I have is living at Avenue M. As a matter of fact, it was right next to the Avenue M Brooklyn BMT subway station, although at that point it was elevated. I have not too many recollections of that time. I was quite young, preschool obviously. I do remember a few small things though. I remember scraping my finger along the windowsill, which was covered with black dirt. Being close to the railroad tracks, I imagine there was a fair amount of soot and stuff in the air. And I remember eating it, well, licking it off my finger. I don't remember that it tasted very badly. The other recollection I have was of going to the butcher store with my grandmother. I was small enough for her to be holding my hand, but in the butcher store, I pulled away from her hand and wandered off. I was never really lost. I always knew where I was, and I walked along next to the subway station on the other side of where I lived, and then walked back home. I don't remember whether there was any frantic searches or anything for me. We lived in an upstairs apartment in the back. One could look out the rear windows and see the subway station very close by. It couldn't have been more than a couple of 100 feet. And we lived over the corner apartment. Ours was the middle apartment. Under that apartment was a soda store, a soda fountain, which of course don't exist anymore. But in order for the convenience of delivering ice cream or ice, I guess it was ice, they put a small door in the hallway that led up to the stairs leading up to our apartment. And of course, being young and being self-centered, why, I assumed immediately that they put that door in there for my convenience in order for me to be able to get into the soda fountain very easily, because as I said, it led directly from the hallway leading to our stairs. Probably the most interesting aspect of living there was the fact that in the living room, which I remember was rather darkish because it was in the center of the house, and there were front windows were in the front room, and the back windows were led on to the kitchen and some other room. I don't know what it was. Might have been a bedroom. But at any rate, there was a four-tiered, I guess it was a book stand about a foot square, which I still have in my bedroom here at Lakota Road. And on top of this stood a plaster statue about a foot and a half high or more of Jesus Christ. Actually, it was called the Sacred Heart because he's moving aside his robes in the front, and there's a big red heart there with a crown of thorns on it, as I recall. And this one day, my grandmother came in and she said, I was in there, and she came in and said, Fritz, to whom were you talking? In German, of course. She never spoke English. And I said, well, I was talking to the statue. And she said, why are you talking to the statue? And my reply was, well, because it talked to me. Now, I don't remember what the statue said. Perhaps it's just as well I don't, because it might have told me I was going to grow up to be an evil old man and go to hell or something like that. But that was an interesting recollection. The next place we lived was Ulmer Park, which I just recently realized must have been named after the German city of Ulm. Brooklyn was very German in those days. And here again we lived in an upstairs apartment. And the thing I remember most there was being in my bed. I have a feeling it was a crib rather than a regular bed. But it was shortly before Christmas, and all the stockings were hung up for Santa Claus to fill. And I woke up, this was the night before Christmas, and I woke up, must have been around 11 o'clock or something. It was really dark, and both my parents were out. They were down, I don't know where they were, but they were within shouting distance of the apartment. And I was presumably left alone, shockingly enough. At any rate, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I looked down, and I saw that the stockings were empty. And I thought that Santa had come and gone and left me. And my mother and father said they could hear my screams down at wherever they were outside the apartment. And of course they came back and reassured me that no, it was not the night before Christmas, that Santa hadn't forgotten me. I remember going over to Ulmer Park in the winter with my father, being warmly dressed. I have a picture he took of me there, and of course they were skating. And he said to me, "Why don't you stand here, and the skaters will be in the background, and it'll look like you're a skater." And he took a picture of me. Also at that place, my Uncle Gus, my mother's brother, used to come and visit us. And one time he came down, and I don't know whether I couldn't have been alone in my house. My grandmother must have been there. But at any rate, he asked me if I wanted to go back up to the country with him, which I was happy to do. And so I went up to my bedroom and grabbed a suitcase and threw it in the truck. Small suitcase. It must have been about 1 foot by 1 foot by 2 foot or something like that. And went on up to the country with him. Of course, when I opened the suitcase, it only had socks in it. I don't know what happened thereafter. I used to go up to the country quite a bit. Sometimes Gus would take me up. I remember once he took me up on a train, and he took me out through Grand Central. And they had some goodies on display there, and I wanted them. And he wouldn't buy me any, so I threw a tantrum and yelled and lay down on the ground and kicked my legs. He just ignored me until I stopped, and then we went on up to the country. The country was very interesting. Some of the things I remember most vividly was, we would take the trash from the house out into the back and burn it. And we'd always take along a couple of potatoes, and we would dump the trash on the ground, throw the potatoes into the trash, and set it on fire. And when it was finished, I would dig out these utterly black potatoes, must have had at least 1/8 of an inch of carb on the outside, and split them open and eat them. They were delicious. We'd put salt on them. They used to have a bran and salt mixture for the cows, which we also ate. And the other thing I remember most vividly, aside from the tin buckets in the hall where you, or if you had to go in the middle of the night, you went up and out in the hall and tinkled or whatever in these buckets. I remember the feather beds. I used to sink down into them ever so deeply. They were wonderful. I remember going across to one of the nearby farms and pulling up carrots out of the ground and just wiping the dirt off and eating them. So I guess we got a pretty healthy diet with plenty of roughage. Another incident I remember up at the farm was that Gus had dogs, and he had this one old dog that it was reached the point of no return, and so he took it out and he dug a grave for it, and we were off a few feet from the grave, and he was going to shoot it there, and I said, "Uncle Gus, why don't you have him stand next to the grave and shoot him there, and he'll fall into the grave," which he thought was a good idea, and which he did, and the poor dog met his fate and fell into the grave and was appropriately buried. Next place I remember living was on Kings Highway. We lived three places there, apparently. One was over a store west of the Kings Highway station. Another was an apartment just to the right of, just to the east of the station. And another one was a home about a block east of the station, a regular house. The only thing I seem to remember from the living over the store was the having a Raggedy Ann doll. And the other thing that I remember there was that my mother bought me some books of knowledge. I was preschool again, and I don't remember whether I read them or not. I seem to think that I read them, but in that case, I must have lived there after we lived at Avenue U, next to the railroad station at Avenue U, where I presumably learned to read because my father used to read the comics to me, and when he read, he would run his fingers along the line, and I apparently learned by the whole word method to read. At any rate, to continue with Kings Highway, the only thing I remember two things about living in the apartment. It was up, must have been 3 or 4 flights of stories up. I remember falling off the arm of a chair and banging my head against the radiator, and I still have a small scar from that. The only other thing I remember was that I locked myself in the bathroom once. I must have been an impossible kid. I locked myself in the bathroom because I was ticked off at something, and I couldn't get it open again, so they had to call the fire department, who had a man climb up on the ladder and come in the window and let me out. I don't know whether I got a thrashing or not, but I certainly should have. At the house, it was a very pleasant house with a porch, and the only thing I remember there was my father brought home a squirrel, which was quite a pet for a while. Still enough trees and things around that area that a squirrel could be quite happy. But he was quite a pet and would sit on your shoulder and would feed him. And I never know what happened to him. I also remember being chased into the house by about 3 kids who were going to beat me up. And I remember getting up in a chair and mooning them out the window. So, at that time, my mother decided I was old enough to go to school, so she took me down to St. Brendan's, which was 3 or 4 blocks south of this building that we lived in, the house. And because she worked at that time, she worked most of the time apparently, because I remember at Avenue M, we were right across the way, within walking distance of the Vitagraph Studios. New York at that time was a big movie industry town, and my mother worked as a continuity. If someone fell in the lake and they shot the next scene the next day or something, he had to appear in wet clothes, things like that. And at any rate, she did work. I think she worked I don't know where she worked at Kings Highway. But she took me to St. Brendan's, and she arranged with the nuns that they would feed me lunch. And so they took me in this lunch. The nuns took me in a room, this empty room with a table and chairs, and gave me my lunch and left me. And when I had finished my lunch, I saw all the kids going home. Or at least I did at some time then. Well, I must have seen them going home in the beginning, obviously. So I figured, well, everybody's going home. I might as well go home, too. I didn't realize, of course, that they split the day. So I went home, and the nuns were frantic because I had disappeared, and they called the police and all sorts of good stuff like that. And that was the end of St. Brendan's, as I recall. The next place I'll talk about is Avenue U, where we live right next to the railroad station and across the street from the police station, which has now been torn down. And as I point out, Dad used to read me the funnies, and I apparently learned to read there. The other item I remember there was the for some peculiar reason, I don't know why, I was bought dolls. Maybe my mother wanted a girl. Anyway, I used to take the dolls apart. I guess maybe I should have grown up to be a surgeon or something. But the more amusing thing was the fact that my mother used to have charge accounts with the newsstand, the cigar store right next to the station, and the bakery there. And I used to accompany her on visits to them, and I should say, "We'll charge it," you know. So I thought that was a pretty good idea. So one day when I was home by myself, I went into the grocery store, and into the cigar store, and I charged some candy and a comic book or something like that. And then I went into the bakery store and charged a couple items. I remember distinctly a Charlotte Russe, which was used to come in about a 3-inch circular cup with a false bottom up about an inch from the bottom, and there would be a rolled sponge cake inside, and it would be topped with whipped cream. This was a Charlotte Russe. So I guess they were pretty good, or else I wouldn't have ordered it. And that's about all I remember about living at Avenue U. The next step was moving to Gerritsen Beach. And it was there that I went to school for the first time, started out in the public school, and after which I was switched to the Catholic school because my mother was a very good Catholic, and so I got a good Catholic education. There were lots of exciting things to do there because Gerritsen Beach was separated from the rest of the Brooklyn by a big swamp on one side, I guess it was the northeast side or the north side, and by Italian truck farms on the south, and by water on the Sheepshead Bay on the east side, and the west side was connected to the rest of town, but there was essentially nothing there. There was no houses or anything between the place where the Graham Theater, where I used to go for double feature matinees for 2 bits. There was nothing there between it and the rest of Brooklyn. And I remember distinctly, there was a grove of what seemed to me very tall trees in the area. I would say southwest of Gerritsen Beach, a beautiful place. Unfortunately, the bastards cut them all down to build houses, you know, the way these land rapists are. It would have made a lovely little park. At any rate, there was a dump. I don't know if there was an official dump, but there was a place where everybody came and dumped stuff. It was at the site of an old racetrack, of which only the cement abutments were there. There was a high section circumscribing what it originally probably circumscribed a portion of the racetrack, and it had piers slanting, looked like flying buttresses sort of coming down from it, only they were completely solid rather than being very opened. I remember going over there with my friend Harold Banker, and we found all sorts of things in the dump. We even found a horse once, but we found some roofing inlaid between the 2 abutments to form a roof, and then we got an empty 50-gallon drum and banged a hole in the bottom and, of course, a hole in the top. And I don't know whether we found the stovepipe, but we let the smoke out. We filled the fire, and then we found an old cot, which we used to sit on and lie on, and we were quite comfy there. And I've always thought that from that, I'd say that poverty was more a state of mind, because we were quite happy and comfortable in that little thing and well protected from the weather. As I recall, it must have been the fall, because we wouldn't have otherwise lit fires. One of my very pleasant memories of Gerritsen Beach was one day it was raining like hell. and John across the street, and my father and I went and walked around on what was now the filled-in swamp, and which is what now is known as it's called a park. What park? I forgot the name of the park. Anyway, we walked around, tramped around there in the rain, and it was a wonderful experience. Real togetherness, if you know what I mean. Harold Banker and I used to wander around. Before it was filled in, we used to wander around the swamp a lot. And we once made a raft. Garrison Beach was bounded on the south by an inlet, Garrison Inlet, and on the north it was bounded by the swamp, and about, I'd say a half a mile into the swamp was another inlet. They were great for digging inlets into this area. As a matter of fact, on this inlet, there was an old, it's not there anymore, it burned down, I think. There was an old Revolutionary War tidal mill, which is said that it ground flour for George Washington's troops. I don't know how true that is, but it was interesting, and I think I have a couple of nails from it. At any rate, Harold Banker and I were over there, and I had been told not to go over there. I didn't pay attention to what people told me, obviously. And we were rafting along, and lo and behold, at the distance of, I don't know how far away it was, but it was quite a distance to Avenue U. To the west, my father drove up in his gas company truck, and he saw me and Harold Banker paddling along, and so he waved to me and to come over, because I'd been told not to do that, so of course I obeyed him, and in the process of pushing the raft along the banks, I managed to fall overboard and get all soaking wet, and so when I got to my father, I got a cuff next to the ear for my pains. And my father I remember my mother used to argue with my father about him hitting me beside the head. And she said, "You'll make the child deaf hitting him there." But I wasn't hit that much. We also found a small rowboat. It was a heavy thing. We fitted it up with a sail, and the sail was made of iron pipe. The boom on the sail and the mast was made of iron pipe, and of course, when you swung the boom around, you really had to duck, because I'm sure getting clouted with a wooden boom is bad enough, but getting clouted on the head with an iron pipe is something you don't want to do very often. We rowed out into Jamaica Bay. I think this was before we had the sail. Unfortunately, when we got out there, the tide was going out, and so we were being swept out toward the Atlantic Ocean, and made us pretty frantic. So we hailed a passing powerboat who took us in tow, and the thing I remember most about it is the little nits biting me in various unmentionable parts, which I didn't dare scratch because of I figured the people would see me, and I didn't want to appear unseemly. My mother was very concerned about my safety in those days. We used to go swimming in the creek, which was about 60 feet deep, as I say. They have dredged most of these channels, so my mother would caution me not to swim across the channel, which I promised not to do, and I didn't. So when she came home, she said, "You didn't swim across the channel, did you?" I said, "No, Mom, I only swam out to the middle, and then I swam back." In this channel also there was moored a yacht, and they used to have wild parties on it all year round. One winter time, it used to get cold enough so that the ice would cover that salt water inlet, and it would get fairly thick. I remember one time it seemed to me it was at least 6 inches thick. You could walk on it with complete safety. But this one night they had a wild party, and this guy fell overboard, and of course when he came up he was under the ice. And that was the end of him until next spring when he floated around, and I remember seeing him, and they were hauling him out. And he was all funny colors from having been under the water so long. When the twins, not the twins, when Gus's two girls, Eloise and Vivian, would come down, they would sometimes throw what they call a party. They'd get $1 and go down and buy soda pop and ice cream, and would stuff that down. You could really have a party on $1. We made, across the creek was a place that where you docked your boats, and they did repairs and stuff like that. We used to know the watchman there by name Ernie. He was an old Italian, quite amusing. He had, I don't remember whether he'd been in Ethiopia or not, probably. But he was a real character, and I might regale you in private some of the things about Ernie. But we used to, with the rowboat, of course, when my cousins, Claire and Marie came down, visited, they would like to go out and row out on the thing. And I recall this one day I was rowing, and one of the girls was dragging her hand in the water, as, you know, this is a natural thing to do. And I said to her, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And she said, oh, it's nothing wrong with the water. And so I said, okay. And so a few minutes later I was rowing, and I carefully didn't look at her directly when this happened, but she found something on her hand, and she pulled her hand out. And of course it was draped with a condom, because condoms used to fill that damn thing at time until the tide went out, and they were quite prevalent, and which is what I've been thinking about. Not to mention there was a sewage disposal plant nearby too, and an occasional turd would appear in the water, and I was actually more concerned about that than the condom. But anyway, she took her hand out of the water, and that was that. I used to, my God, I've got a long list here. A lot of things happened in Garrison Beach that I remember. I did quite a bit of experiments with my chemistry set. Barbara has the little desk that I used to do it on. One of the fold out parts is quite eaten away with the acids that I spilled. I'm surprised my mother let me do it. She must have been crazy. Spilled in my experimentation. One of the things I did find out there was that if you mixed all sorts of chemicals together, you came up with a brown sludge. But I used to do more exciting things than that. One experiment I tried was I had this, I don't know, it must have been a bag from a water bag or something, or a rubber bag of some kind with a hose leading out of it. And I had picked up an empty 50 caliber shell somewhere, and by that time, of course, I had been making explosives quite regularly. You know, you'd get sulfur, sodium nitrite or trate, and charcoal, and mix them together, and you had a fine explosive. And so I filled up this shell with this stuff. I figured the powder would burn and make gas and blow up this rubber bag that I had, but unfortunately it didn't. The shell exploded, and I got a couple of fragments in my leg, my thigh. No, not my thigh. Well, some was in my thigh. And I also got a piece that grazed my fourth finger on my right hand and made a lovely Y-shaped cut which went down to the bone. I remember my mother taking me to the doctor, and he said, the best thing to do is let it heal from the inside out and just keep it moist, and it did, although it was quite a gaping wound. I also had used to go down to a chemical supply house in Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn, called Eimer and Amond. They would sell you anything. I bought some, for example, phosphorus, which I inadvertently I heated up for some reason, so it melted and it rolled off whatever was on and onto my leg and burned my leg. And I remember there my mother took me over to a nearby pharmacy, and the druggist says, we'll put white of egg on it, which would counteract the effect of the phosphorus. And we used to, I also bought sodium there. And that used to be fun. You'd take it down to the water and throw it in the water, and of course it would react violently or release hydrogen gas. And after throwing it in the water and it released the gas, there was sufficient heat that it would burst into flame, which was very amusing. Also made, in those days, they had what they call grease cups on the cars. These were a funnel. These were about, an inch or an inch and a half in diameter, and tapered down to had sort of a funnel on the bottom, which you screwed into the car, and then you would stick the grease in this grease cup and push it in with some kind of plunger device. And what I used to do was, and the tops came off, the round flat top came off, the part away from the car, and I used to take them off and fill the bottom with this gunpowder mixture, or whatever we want to call it, and I would take a gelatin capsule and insert that in the middle, in the powder, and put some sulfuric acid in it, and I would screw the top back on again, take that over to the water's edge and throw it out into the water. Well, it generally would explode after it got under the water and make quite a pleasing detonation. Of course, if one had blown up in my hand, it probably would have killed me. So, probably what the statue said, Fritz, you're going to do a lot of stupid things, but I'll watch out for you. Let's see. Okay, that takes care of that. The riding subway. Oh, yeah, I used to go riding on the subway all the time. You know, it was only a nickel on the bus and a nickel on the subway, and you could ride all over Brooklyn without getting off the trains. You just get off at the station, walk over to the other side, and go back to where you came from. So used to spend a lot of time riding the trains and get up I'd stand in the front car and look out the front window with the window open. Of course, this is probably a lot ruined my hearing, because when I'm through the tunnels a lot of times, we go around these turns, and the screeching was fantastic. I suppose I should sue the city for not protecting me from that. And of course, a lot of it was elevated in New York and in Brooklyn, so there was quite a sightseeing tour to go all around the city on those. I'm not so sure you would want to risk it anymore. I used to also take the trains and go up to the museums in New York, up in Manhattan, to the Museum of Natural History and to the Museum of Art. I guess it was in the Museum of Art they used to have an atrium. And I used to sit in the atrium, and they used to have concerts there, and I'd sit in the atrium, and you could hear the concerts in the atrium, and it was very pleasant. Atriums usually had a pond in the middle with plants in it, and that's where I really learned to enjoy classical music. These recollections are not chronologically ordered, with which you'll have to put up, unfortunately. But when I first went to class, I must have been around, the classes went around the church in Resurrection School in a U shape, and the earliest grade was at the one arm of the U, and it would an inverted U really, and it would go around. So the highest grade was at the other end of the U. So I must have been around. I was in the middle of the crossbar of the U. Really not a U; it was more like a table shape. But I remember this class. This is a class where I remember we put on a little skit or something about dilatory students who would just say, "Wait a minute," their parents asked them to do something, and they'd say, "Wait a minute." And the role I had was one of the dozen or so little devils who would prance around the stage singing this "Wait a Minute" song. But at any rate, that was the room in which I had to go and do number one. And I waved my hand at the teacher, and I waved my hand at you. I must have been a pain in the ass or something, because she refused to acknowledge me or let me go. Eventually, I couldn't restrain myself, and I peed down my leg, after which she let me go. Another thing that used to stick in my mind from Gerritsen Beach was my mother grew hollyhocks, which are beautiful flowers to look at. But when they die and are dry, they have little teensy stickers or stubble on them, which are very itchy. And my mother used to make me go out and pull up these damn hollyhocks after they died. And this is undoubtedly what turned me against gardening ever since. When I was, Luna Park was still in operation. I remember that very well. I remember the water, to shoot the chutes where you went down on the wall and the boat in the water, which of course is a very common thing nowadays. And I remember more distinctly, just inside the entrance was a little stand where they sold marzipan. As I said, Brooklyn was very German in those days, and marzipan is a great favorite. If you go to Germany now, you'll see marzipans sold everywhere, and it's usually made in the shapes of fruits and little animals and so all sorts of things. And this place had a variety, a selection like that of marzipan in the shape of fruits and so on. I remember that quite well. There was a very large hotel called the Half Moon Hotel down there. I befriended a Jewish fellow who lived up on the umpteenth floor there, and so I visited fairly frequently. But the most pleasant recollections I have of it are the communion breakfast I had there. The communion business was a pain, but I used to love the breakfast because in addition to the eggs and all that sort of stuff, we used to have cereal, and they would give you half and half to go on the cereal, which really made the communion worthwhile. My father used to take me down to Coney Island to go to the so-called motorbike races. In that, you would have cyclists would follow motorcyclists. They would be right up against them, essentially, and they apparently were the air flowing around the motorcyclist would sort of suck up the cyclists. They could go like hell. They used to have races like that. The floating island and chicken soup with legs. Oh yes, my mother. I don't remember a lot about my mother's cooking. I know I loved spaghetti, and I used to eat that till it came out my ears. But the two things I remember my mother making that I really liked, one was floating islands, where she would make a liquid custard. Wasn't a hard custard like you find so often in the stores. This was soupy, like a thick soup, and a bright yellow. And it used to take a lot of preparation because you had to stand over it so as not to scald the milk when you made it, because it was made with milk. And she would put lady fingers in that, and I guess a dollop of cream or something on them. That's why it was called floating island. And incidentally, the chicken soup, when you bought your chicken, you got everything. And so I could distinctly remember the chicken soup with the chicken legs floating around. It was good soup. Oh, I omitted from my discussion of the country, the farm, that Gus, the next farm over was a Polish fellow who had two cute daughters by the name of Wasnok. And he had just built himself a new two-holer. When you built yourself a new toilet, you didn't move it. You just built a new one over the old hole. So the two-holer was built over a septic tank, a pit which had quite a bit in it. And Wasnock and Gus had a falling out, so one night around midnight, Gus went over and planted 2 sticks of dynamites in that new two-holer, and as he said, just as he crossed the threshold, it went. Of course, it would have been terrible if someone had been sitting in it, but fortunately no one was. But Wasnock's farm was well decorated with fertilizer, Another thing I remember, my parents used to have birthday parties for me. I only remember one where all the kids sat around with their hands under a blanket, and my father was the narrator, and he would tell us, a horror story, and what he would have, he would say, presumably this was a guy, he would pass around half-cooked limp spaghetti, cold spaghetti, and say, these are the veins, and he would pass around peeled grapes and say, here's the eyeballs, naturally causing lots of shrieks from the girls and stuff like that. It was fun. And it says here, elephant ends, I see. Another recollection I have of Coney Island was preschool. This probably should have gone earlier, but I don't remember my father's father at all, and I don't really remember my mother's father. My father's father delivered soda water and stuff like that to the different saloons in Coney Island, and of course every saloon he got to, he would have to have a drink on the house, and so by the time he got back to home down there, he would be essentially non-compos mentis and falling off the wagon in a different style. And he was either he or my mother's father, who worked as a waiter down in Coney Island, took me down to Luna Park, to the part where they had the elephants. I remember being scared. I remember holding his hand and being scared to death of this big elephant. I don't know how big it was, but to me it looked tremendous, of course, being just a little kid. I remember going down to a place called Feldman's in Coney Island, and my grandmother would get me a hot dog with sauerkraut on it. And of course, as a kid, I suppose it looked tremendous. It looked pretty big. I look at the hot dogs now, they look minute. It may be that it was just my small size made them look bigger, but they were fantastic. Used to go down to a place called also Steeplechase. There were two amusement parks. There's Luna Park and Steeplechase. And you children remember Steeplechase because we went there when my father worked there. And I didn't find that as exciting as Luna Park, but it was fun. Garrison Beach was also where Tommy came out with this famous statement, which has been appeared also all over the country in books and things, sometimes incorrectly. But he was ill upstairs in Garrison Beach, and my mother used to take a book up in the late afternoon or in the evening and to read to him before he went to sleep. And of course, being ill, he was kind of irritable. And my mother this one day had brought up the book prior to the reading, and so he saw it up there and he shouted down the stairs, "What'd you bring that book for me to be read to out of up for?" Which means he put 5 prepositions on the end of the sentence, which I thought was pretty clever, especially since it made complete sense. I forgot to mention that my father's father spoke English with quite an accent, I'm sure, and he also never did get rid of some of his German expressions. Like my father would tell me that he used to say, "Throw the cow over the fence some hay." Well, in English, which depends so much on order, it sounds funny as hell, but in German, the inflection and the endings on the words would tell you exactly what it meant, and it wouldn't be at all confusing. I used to have a big tree out in the front yard in which the sparrows would congregate, and on Sunday my father's father would sit on the front porch and shoot the sparrows out of the tree with a shotgun. My father would have to pick them up and take them in the house and defeather them, after which they were fried or broiled by my grandmother and my grandfather. He was quite an experimentalist too, quite a madcap too. He had a big firecracker one day, and he lit the fuse, and as they sometimes happen, it didn't go off. So this guy was going to go over and check it out and see what's wrong. So my father went over, what an asshole, and blew on it. The damn thing blew up in his face. Well, he was blind, completely blind. And they took him to the hospital, and they strapped him down. They took out pieces of this thing out of his eyes. I don't know what else they did, but he had this bandage over his eyes for, it must have been a week. And they used to, every day, they used to stand him up and say, okay, Fritz, he was called Fritz too, or Hoagie. We want you to, here's a pole we want you to hold on to and walk down the hall. When you come to something, you turn around and walk back. And he discovered after they took the bandages off, what they'd done is given him a mop, and he had been busy mopping the floor blind while he was blinded, which I thought was a very clever use to put to an otherwise useless individual in the hospital. Now, I've run out of my list, and I see I still have a fair amount of tape left, and I'm trying to think of whether there's anything which I have omitted which might be of interest. Pretty well, one of the things I remember about up the country was going to what was called Duke's Park. You've probably never heard of Doris Duke, but they were extremely rich, and their grounds were open to the public during the day. And Eloise and Vivian used to take me over. They used to take me when they went out with their boyfriends, necking and stuff like that. I don't know what the hell for, but anyway, they did. I also remember one time, I guess, they had cows up at the farm besides chickens. She had 5,000 white leghorns, and I don't know how many cows, but we used to go wander around the back, and there was this pond in the back. It had cow flop in it, as cow ponds will. And I remember trying to jump across this thing and landing right smack in the middle. And so naturally I had no clothes to wear. And so they took me, I don't know whether it was this time or whether it was just playing games, but at one time I was dressed up in the girls' clothes. They put on girls' clothes on me, a dress on me. And at that time, my father and mother drove up, and I have a picture of myself dashing toward them, tried to knock the camera out of their hand because they were taking a picture of me in the girls' dress. What else? The house up there, the farmhouse, was a lovely big house. I remember they had a coal cellar. You would go down. They had hand pumps, like you pump the thing up and down, the water would gush out. At any rate, they had a coal cellar with a dirt floor, which was lower than the rest of the house, and an upper story. It was a tremendous big building. I understand that Gus built it himself, just as he built a road stand up there too. Beautiful big place, with the dance floor and everything, and he did it all himself. Fantastic person. He, well, anyway, let's see now. It was in Garrison Beach that I first experimented with smoking. I must have been fairly young, probably still in grammar school, and I tried everything. I tried cigars and cigarettes, and I didn't see much sense to any of them. Pipes and cigarettes. And one time I got a cigar, and all I had for lunch was a chocolate bar and something else. And I remember going over to the beach by the old mill and smoking this cigar. Well, it got to me, and I had the dry heaves, which is the most excruciating experience, and that cured me of cigars. It probably also helped cure me of smoking. I couldn't see any sense in the smoking. As far as I could see, it wasn't enjoyable. I don't know whether I inhaled or not. I doubt it. But I couldn't see any sense to it because it didn't taste good. And I figured that the only reason the other kids were smoking was because, one, they wanted to look grown up, and two, they didn't know what to do with their hands. And of course, being the contrary type, I said, well, I'll look grown up soon enough when I grow up, and if I can't figure out something to do with my hands, I'm pretty stupid. Academically, I was a good student. Matter of fact, I found school boring, just like Justin, I guess, because there wasn't enough challenge in it. And I remember in the 8th grade, I was the top student in Christian doctrine. This is not because I was devout or anything, although I'm afraid my mother misinterpreted it in that manner. But it was simple because all you had to do was know the 10 Commandments, the 7 capital sins, and you could figure everything else out from that. In other words, quite logically. And so I recall being presented a prize for getting the highest grade in Christian doctrine by the priest. I don't know what the hell he gave me. I have long since discarded it, probably some religious item, and talking about how I would probably grow up and be a priest and all that sort of garbage. And the only thing I remember about that was noticing the dandruff on his black gown. Also, this is where in around the 6th or the 7th grade, I came home with a 96% average on my report card. I guess this was the first term of the 7th grade or 6th grade. And I showed it to my mother, somewhat proudly, I'm sure. And she said, you know, if you tried a little bit harder, you could have gotten 100%. The next term, I barely passed. However, I did find studies interesting, and so I snapped out of that and did graduate among the top members of the class, which helped me, of course, getting into high school. Catholic students had to take, or students who went to Catholic schools had to take what they called the Regents, and this was a series of comprehensive exams in various things, including writing. Well, my writing was so bad at that time, and although it hasn't improved much, that I failed the Regents in writing, although I did quite well in the other courses. So while I was in my first year in high school, I had to go back and take the Regents in writing over again in order to pass it. At one time, my mother and father and I took a trip down to Washington, D.C. My mother had gone down there as part of the daylight savings lobbying effort as a secretary, I guess. And so we visited various places, but the primary thing I remember was Washington, D.C., and I remember visiting the Washington Monument, and the guard said to me, he said, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Brooklyn. I always remember I'm a little redheaded, cute little redheaded kid. I said, well, here's a piece of the marble, a lightning bolt struck the top of the monument, knocked off some pieces, and this is a little piece of the Washington Monument. Well, of course, I was delighted and took it back home and put it in with my box of goodies, which had things like, the only other thing I remember being in there was some paper parachutes with something hanging on them that had been dropped out of an airplane over the town for some publicity reason whatsoever. And I remember coming home one day and asked my mother where my box of goodies was, and she says, oh, it was just a bunch of junk, so I threw it out, which might be one of the reasons why I keep things so carefully now, and so that the house is all full of tons of junk, which you may or may not have a lot of fun going through after I pass away. But it's something for you to look forward to. My father's mother, of course, had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. One pair had dark or black hair, another pair had red hair, and another pair had blonde hair, boy and a girl each. I don't know how they arranged this, but that's the way it worked out. And it was a pretty big house, had a big basement, and I remember in the basement there lived with us a colored man who was a porter up at Grand Central Station. As a matter of fact, he carried my bags for me when I went back to California after when I got my commission as a second lieutenant. And his name was George Skinner, but we called him Dink for some reason or other. And he was like one of the family. As a matter of fact, my father's youngest brother looked an awful lot like him, and I've often wondered about that. We had lots of good times down at my grandmother's. As I say, it was a big house. I could wander around. Curiously enough, it was built like the German palatial residences of all the windows were along the south side, off which were a series of rooms, and on the window wall were the doors between the rooms. These were generally left open so you could walk in the front door and go into the house and be able to walk from the front door, which was at the west end of the building, all the way down to the kitchen, which was at the east end of the building. And naturally at night or whenever, you would close the doors for warmth and privacy. My earliest remembrance of it was of the gas mantles in the kitchen. They still used gas for illumination. And I don't remember anything else about it. The house is no longer there. Obviously, there's a big brick apartment house there now, probably full of Russian Jews or something like that. As I said, Coney Island was quite German. I remember my father used to take me also down to he was a member of the Volunteer Firemen's Association. His father was a volunteer fireman, and they used to have parades on the 4th of July and stuff like that, and naturally they would imbibe considerably, and it was with difficulty that some of them managed to walk in a straight line in the parade. My father played the drum, and they used to have a fife and drum corps with the Firemen's Auxiliary, and I remember they used to have contests between the drummers and the fifers to see who could outlast the other. Well, I imagine your puffing got tired before your hands did, and so I'm sure the drummers probably won most of the time. My mother was a very avid gardener, and she was the first president, I think, of the Lily of the Valley Garden Club of Garrison Beach. One would think with a background like that I would be really into gardening, but the experience with the hollyhocks was enough. Let's see, my father used to play baseball and football. He played baseball well into his years in the gas company. Of course, he was great on painting. He was not an original painter, but was essentially restricted to copying other paintings. But he had something which I missed, which I don't have and would like to have, and that is line. He could look at something and draw you the outline of it, and it would be a real true outline. He did a lot of painting. As a matter of fact, he used to paint the gas company used to put on shows. They used to put on minstrel shows. Of course, you wouldn't know what a minstrel show is nowadays. That's not politically correct. And I enjoyed the minstrel shows. The members of the company, of the gas company, the employees would be the minstrels, and it was exciting. They also had a Western-style show. My father painted imitation log cabins and things like that for it. And he was quite active, and eventually rose to become, he was in charge of all outside operations in the Brooklyn Borough Gas Company at the time he retired. He could go almost anywhere in Brooklyn and say, well, if you dig down here 6 feet, you'll find a 3-inch main and so on. So some of my pleasant memories of him was going out in the wintertime when it was all snowy, when he would go out on emergency. And he'd take me with him, and it was real exciting to go out late at night on that sort of operation. Well, I see him at the end of the tape, so I'll close for now.